Who the hell are you?
You know. You all know exactly who I am. I'm the cook. I'm the man who killed Gus Fring. Now, say my name.
Heisenberg.
You're goddamn right.
The Cinik Radio Podcast.
Hi, I'm Chad L. Coleman, Tyrese from The Walking Dead, and Cuddy from The Wire, and you are listening to the Cinik Radio Podcast. Here are your hosts, Cinik.
Hey, the facts are Spider-Man belongs in the MCU. Sony was delusional thinking they didn't need Marvel, and now he's back. And we, the fans, are 100% proudly responsible for that.
Igrihe.
As long as DC wants to make dark and gritty movies, they're going to lag behind Marvel in every category.
And Ryan.
Batman vs. Superman is objectively better than Infinity War.
IG, did we just forget Kim?
You guys completely suck.
This is the greatest show of all time.
This is episode 126 of the Cinik Radio Podcast, and I'm your host and cybernetic guardian from the future, Cinik. And joining me, as always, my co-host, and three people who don't agree on a lot, but can agree on one thing: Epstein didn't kill himself. Igrihe, Ryan, and Kim. And this week, we are talking the latest offering in the once great Terminator franchise, Dark Fate. Can it return to its greater form? Let's find out. IG, we open the movie with a very distraught Sarah Connor from Terminator 2. Was this the filmmaker's way of saying, hey, forget those other three films, just focus on the two that were good?
I think that's what they were trying to lean toward. This is the story we're worried about. We're not worried about all that other nonsense and everything. There is no Batman in the Terminator franchise, so we can just get away from Christian Bale. Other John Connors suck, so just come back this way. You know, even though in Terminator 2, like, it was a great movie, but John Connor was kind of a whiny little bitch. That's fine. We're going back that direction. And I don't know. I'm fine with that. Like, it's okay to retcon all that other stuff out. But there's some caveats to that. We'll get to that.
Yeah, I liked it. I thought it set the tone for the movie, and it did take you back to a place where the movies were actually kind of respectable. Ryan, Sarah pats herself on the back for saving billions of lives, but she can't save John's as he eats the bar not long after Judgment Day. Is this a problem with messing with the future? I mean, robots can come back every single day. You get this epic encounter that we saw, and they lived through it by the skin of their teeth, but then they just send another one 2 years later. Are you just fighting a losing battle there?
I mean, I think you're fighting a losing battle, and I think time travel is so tricky to get right. But, you know, then it begs the question, like, and I'm not, it's not an original thought, but like, why not send an army of Terminators? Like, why didn't, when, Terminator 1, why wasn't just an army of Terminators sent, at one time? How they could barely battle one? Why not battle a bunch? So there are all these questions that you can ask. And yeah, it does feel like unless you create certain rules, then yeah, you could just keep sending them back. And clearly, even though they did change the future, they couldn't change the future because they still in the future were able to send them back in the past, even though they changed the past. So, it gets all messed up and wonky with time travel. And then, you get a situation where you ruin a franchise in the opening scene of a movie.
Well, how do we know that they didn't send back like 100 of them at a time and they were just working different areas? And when they killed the other one in Terminator 2, that this one finally caught up, that should have found him during Terminator the original, because it's that type of it's a 101, right? So it's an original Terminator. Like, it may have just been like hunting around for so long that it just took him years to get to.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, like, why not send 500 to the same place in the same time and just have them go, like, can't fight off 500 Terminators?
Nah, I don't know. Maybe they're like lack of power. They don't have the human batteries from the Matrix. Maybe.
There's I mean, obviously there's no story if you do that, because John Connor gets killed and end of story. But it's just like, if you're going to play with a lot of these time travel, like, I was okay when it's like, all right, one Terminator is sent back in time and one Terminator or person is sent back in time as well to save, the savior. But then once you start adding more, we're going to send them at different times and different places, then you start to open up these other questions where I never thought, why don't we just send a bunch of Terminator? Like, so I think that's the thing, is like, once you start opening things up like this, then you really start opening up all the kind of logical issues that come with, a time travel movie. and the rules that they then set for themselves.
Well, Ryan, are we using that as a plot device way too often in movies? I mean, Terminator can kind of lay claim to it because they were out there, 20 or so years ago before everybody else. But we have had a lot of time travel movies recently. Do you think maybe we need to lay off it a little?
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to lay off it or lay off it unless it's a smart take on it that uses time travel, intelligently and in a way that really services the plot. But I think, what happens, in the opening, I think it was really pissed me off and it renders the previous movies useless. And that's a problem with the time travel in anything is that, if you throw it in there too much and it just makes everything else useless. And I think, Deadpool 2 does a great job of kind of making fun of that problem of time travel in movies. And, in its own way, it has a lot of time travel, but it also kind of, showcases like how ridiculous it is. So yeah, I think unless the time travel, makes sense or services the plot, it's overused and then just creates far more issues than it resolves.
The new Guardian is played by the OE striking Mackenzie Davis from *Halt and Catch Fire*. Kim, was it refreshing to see a strong female presence saving the world in a role usually reserved for Arnold or another male action hero?
Yeah, I thought it was great. And I also enjoyed seeing another fellow tall female taken on the screen and completely dominating everybody else around her.
What did you think of her performance, both acting and physically? Because she really toned up for this role.
She's just awesome. I really genuinely enjoyed not just the character, but her acting in general is so unique from each little performance that she puts on, depending on what role she's taking on. And we have a variance of opinions, luckily, this time on the show. And I thought that all the acting they did the best they could with what they were given. There were some issues that I had with like writing on a few things and a couple of large plot holes that I'm sure we'll get to in a little bit, but I thought she did fabulous.
I really did too. She doesn't have a big range, but she commands attention when she's on the screen. Like, she plays kind of the same character in everything I've seen her in, but at the same time, that is a really good character. Like, her personality is a really strong, engaging personality, but she's never got to show this badass side of her before, which I really enjoyed. Her throwing down like that, fighting the T-800 was really, really cool to see. And I hope that if they do another one, she definitely returns. IG, the movie doesn't wait long for the action to kick off, as we have a battle in the car plant and then a car chase. And then there's a showdown on the highway. The action in the movie, was it enough to get the franchise back on track and for you to get excited about its future?
I had some problems with the new Rev 9. It just seemed like I found myself asking, why is there like a skeleton inside that operates independently and what's going on? Like, it just seemed odd. And watching, like, when they were hucking the rebar through the semi or the front loader that he was chasing them with, and he was like using that to extend himself out on the front of the truck. I'm like, but why? What are we trying to show the ability? Now, the difference is, if we look back at T2 and the stuff that the T-1000 was doing with the liquid metal and everything that he was doing, it made sense. This, however, is like that, except we're going to do more, except the more doesn't make any sense. It's just there because it looks kind of cool, but it doesn't do anything. Like, okay, so you could split yourself and kind of be two Terminators. Okay, so why? What's the point? And it kind of took away from a lot of the action for me. I just didn't. It every time he did it like took me out of going on just thinking, well, what's the point in this? I mean, so the skeleton's still flying the helicopter while you fly through the sky. Great. Now, what are you going to do with that? So, and it seemed like the skeleton got stupid whenever he left. So maybe that's it. Maybe that's the part of it.
The solid form of the Terminator did very little, was easy to kind of knock around. I didn't understand why it needed to be done, other than the first time they did it, it looked kind of cool. And then after that, it was just kind of like, ugh. Gracie faces off against the Rev 9, which appears to have a physical form and a liquid body like they did in Judgment Day. Ryan, based off the fight in the plant, which I know you weren't a big fan of from our previous talks, and on the highway, did the Rev 9 seem slightly unbeatable and maybe a little too overpowered?
A lot of my problems with the movie are with the writing. The Rev 9... look, if you go back to Judgment Day, I think that movie revolutionized effects. And Robert Patrick's performance was one of the most terrifying kind of villains in any sci-fi that we've seen. It's right up there, with like the Vaders and, even like the Hannibal Lecters. He was really menacing. Something about that performance, it was amazing. And the effects were great. And so I think that every subsequent movie has had to find a way to match that, and I think that, in a good way, one of the few good things, I think it did a good job of kind of blending your kind of the old school T800 with the T1000 and some of the things that have come since, and making him somewhat unique, but they could only go so far. So I actually didn't mind. I thought he did decent. Wasn't Robert Patrick. It wasn't, it didn't have the same kind of awe that you got watching the effects from Terminator 2. But I thought as a villain in context, it was fine. It wasn't amazing. But I'm probably not as down on that part of the movie as you guys sound. And I kind of like that he could, split from the exoskeleton. And I thought some of the effects were pretty terrible, but then some of the effects were actually pretty decent. So, I wasn't that down. And I thought he was fine and, fairly imposing and scary villain for what it was. And I think he did well with what he had to work with.
Ryan, you don't think it lacked a little bit of originality or creativity? We're just going to take the two Terminators from the first two movies and combine them. I mean, we're not putting peanut butter into chocolate here. We're just taking the two Terminators and mashing them together, and then one can jump out when it's convenient.
You're absolutely right. It was no, I never said it was original, and it was completely a blend of what we've had before. So I think, given what he had to work with, it was fine. And effects wise, I think they did some interesting things. But yeah, as a villain, and I would have liked for them to have come up with something that was more interesting than a shape-shifting android with some kind of liquid metal / mechanical exoskeleton. Like, it just, yeah, you're absolutely right. I don't think there was anything original about it, and I didn't love it. It's just that it wasn't as bad as some other aspects of this movie.
Well, it just seemed like pot talk to me, like, hey, we'll take both of them and put them together, and every once in a while they'll split, and it'll be really
exactly
cool.
Well, I feel like it was one of those things where someone had an idea of, what if we create one that splits into two, and everything else was kind of like, deconstructed from there. It's, they designed the character based on that one idea, and yeah, it made for a cool looking scene, but it didn't make for it. Again, it wasn't the T1000. It wasn't awe-inspiring. It wasn't, in 20 years we're not going to remember this, and so I honestly, I don't think it was any better than like from Rise of the Machines, the what's the name, Christina Loken or whatever, the woman who played the villain in that one. Like, it wasn't any better than that. I mean, it was fine, but yeah, not original and not enough to make me ever care about seeing this movie again.
All right, Kim, I'm going to throw you in the movie here. The future of the world depends on a young Mexican lady named Danny. But unlike Sarah, John before her, Danny actually is part of the solution and not part of the problem, and doesn't make things worse on her saviors. My question to you, Kim, is if you were put in a situation where a stranger marches up, just saves your life, has a gun, holds out their hand and says to you, come with me if you want to live, what are you going to do?
I'm going in the opposite direction because fuck all of them. And this is way too crazy for me to just blindly follow somebody in a damn car. Not one, but two psychotic women, and one who may or may not be half android, half not. To me, that was one of those flaws in the writing where I just kind of felt it left a little bit to be desired. I think the lady's name is Natalie Reyes, that plays Danny. And she was okay, but I didn't like her. Like, I felt like she was just kind of flat, and half the movie, it's, subtitles. She is speaking Spanish. Okay, fine. I'm fine with that. She starts speaking English, but she has a fairly heavy accent. And then towards the end of the movie, she has no accent whatsoever, and she's just speaking English. That to me was bad acting, on that particular front. But that's really all, like, the one thing that I had wrong with that particular individual. But what am I going to go and just blindly jump into a car with somebody? Hell no. So do you believe that Sarah's reaction in the first movie and John's in the second movie were more lifelike? Like, because they both kind of bucked the system. They didn't just go quietly. John almost got them caught. Yes. Yeah, they fought back. There was resistance to it at first, the Terminator had to physically pick him up over his shoulder, Arnold Schwarzenegger did, Edward Furlong, and, physically carry him to say, you're coming with me. that made sense, right? And then he had to explain it to him later, but there really was no overall explanation. Like, you know, there was a minimal amount of character building, and then all of a sudden she's just supposed to be the savior of the world, and it chaps my ass a little bit, that one particular part.
Speaking of Eddie Furlong, he hasn't had a great run of things since Terminator. He had a little bit of success, and I had heard he's going to be in the movie, and I was kind of excited for old Eddie. I was like, wow, Eddie's going to be it. And it was a de-aged Eddie that was in the movie for all of 3 seconds, long enough to die. That was kind of a bummer. I was like, oh, this poor guy. I hope they at least got him some sort of, you know, scale check, because I think he's working at Boston Market. I'm not sure, but I think he is. IG, we went from Skynet to Legion. The future seemed just as bad. AI robots hunting people starving, the end of civilization. Suddenly, does our plan of eating mass amounts of peanut butter cups and dying pretty early seem like such a bad idea? I mean, it's not long before we are fucking robots. How long before the robots come to fuck us?
Yeah, that's the thing. If this is like a picture of where we're going and what's actually going to happen, give me all the peanut butter cups. I'm stopping going to the gym. Like, I'm going to smoke everything you can get near me. Like, it's fine. Bring me all the heroin, crack, all of it. Bring it all here. I want to die in the next 2 weeks, but I'm going happy. Shit. Like, so they stopped Judgment Day and no more Skynet. Never heard of it. But we get the same things in Terminators anyway. And the skeleton inside of the Rev 9 looks just like the Terminators from everything else. So, like, not only do we get the same thing, but they end up doing the exact same thing. So I'm curious as to, like, what the point of the other movies anymore at all was. And that's my biggest problem with this, is they retconned away from amazing movies. And rather than do something new and say, hey, no, we're still Skynet. There's still this thing, you know, something else happened. There's a way through this. Nope, we're going to retcon that all in. It doesn't matter what we do. The AI that the government's creating and everything to do battle planning is going to gain sentience and kill us all anyway. What are we doing, guys? And if that's the reality, like, I need all the peanut butter cups. Like, I've got some here anyway, because of course I do.
Well, that's my point, Kim. I mean, there was a poll out not too long ago that 70% of millennials don't feel good enough, and 80% of them don't feel good about the future. Could it be entertainment that made them feel this way? Because we never get a positive outlook of the future in any of these movies. It's always doomsday, end of the world, the Earth's attacking, plants are killing us, robots everywhere. Could it be Hollywood that's ruining our kids?
Or are you going to start attacking video games next? What's crazy about all of it is it's very contradictory from, like, the major punchline of Sarah Connor's "There is no fate but what we make." And the shit still happens anyway. You fixed it once, and it still fucking happened. There's kind of two sides to that. Is the younger generation so influenced by the fictitious, you know, things that they see online, on social media, on movies and whatever, that they're allowing it to determine their mental state? Or is it just so abundant and it's unavoidable? You know what I mean? Like, they're looking to that as some form of reality. If that's the case, that's really freaking sad that, you know, it's basically our generation that set this up for them, you know, and the people before us.
Ryan, a little off topic, and we're gonna go way off road on this one. But the movie takes us through Mexico, into the desert, and towards Texas. I recently seen on the news that our $10 billion wall, which is a brilliant idea, by the way, is being defeated by $100 circular saws from places like Home Depot. Would the $10 billion be better used on manpower and the technology like we've seen in this movie, maybe enhanced patrols? Would that be a better use of the movie? How do you think, ideally, how would you secure the border?
I don't, definitely not a cheap wall that can be breached. Well, I mean, like that, people could literally just climb it. But apparently it's a big, beautiful wall that is impenetrable. But yeah, I mean, I think there are ways to patrol it. We have technology, there are drones. We can have, you know, between manpower and, you know, at some points there should be walls or some kind of a barrier, maybe a moat. maybe some alligators, as suggested. Maybe we'll put
alligators with lasers.
Yes, I almost guarantee that was probably suggested. No, but no, I mean, like we had the technology to do it between video surveillance, drones, satellite. You can manage it. But the reality is, I think, you're the one that threw a political question to me. But the reality is that I think at this point, more people are, well, no, that's not true. But they're like, a lot of people are leaving the country versus coming in. But we do have an issue, though, with asylum seekers. So I'm not going to say that like more people are going than coming in. But no, I mean, like there are ways to deal with it. That a wall, it's a waste of money. And yeah, sure, are there places to put up walls? Sure, but I think we could spend that money is better spent elsewhere. But it has just become a big political football because I think on one side it's like, well, no, I would say Democrats are like no wall at all, but they've conceded a good bit. But I think on the other side, it's like we're going to build the wall no matter what. And I think we should just be smart about it. I think most people want the same thing, which is a border that's protected. I think, if you're on the left, you probably want more people allowed in. And if you're on the right, you probably want fewer people allowed in. And I think we're not that far off, but it's become such a big political football that it's like wall or no wall. That's it. Nothing else. And, it's just kind of ridiculous that we waste so much time on this when there are actual ways to kind of protect the borders that cost us a lot less money.
You're being distracted. Kim, it wouldn't be a Terminator movie without Arnold. But this time he plays Carl, the reformed Terminator with the heart of gold. Was this good use of the Governator or just way too convenient storytelling?
It's both, but I liked it. I enjoyed the fact that he had some humor, and I liked the fact that he had to adapt. That's part of what that model of Terminator was originally designed to do: collect information, data, and, learn. From the very first time that he landed and went into that bar and, beat some guy up to take his leather jacket and his sunglasses, that was adapting, that was adjusting to the situation. So I enjoyed his actual character, and I liked the acting, and I liked the fact that I got to actually laugh at some of the crap that they had him saying, because somebody like him, Mr. Universe selling drapes, I thought that was hilarious.
Yeah, they did make his character almost likable. He was on Stern not too long ago. And, obviously everybody knows that at one point he was the governor of California. And whether you agree or didn't agree about the fact that he might have done a good job, the one thing that always strikes me about him, and because of the stupid rules of this country, if you weren't born here, you can't be president here, he is so passionate about people. He's passionate about people and he's passionate about kids. And you don't ever hear politicians talking the way he does anymore. He refers to himself as a Reagan Republican. And I generally don't swing towards that ideology. But the way that he states things and the way that he looks at the world, it really would be a better place, at number one, if he could be president. And number two, if more politicians thought like him. Because he just laid it out there where we've got to get away from this idea that more money is better. And we've got to start focusing on making the kids feel better about the way that the future is going. Make sure underprivileged kids have things to eat at school. And I mean, if you get a chance, take a little bit of time. I'm sure the interview is up there on probably YouTube, but it was really it was touching to hear him talk.
He talks about all that on his Instagram.
Yeah, he seems to be a decent guy. So I'm always rooting for him. We definitely had a house divided during the movie, Ryan. I mean, there was tension on all sides of the good team, from Sarah to Grace to Carl. Did that tension make it a little more interesting, or just make the trio kind of unlikable, the fact that they were at each other's throat the whole movie?
It felt a little contrived for me. Like it made sense, and I feel like it was almost a situation of too many characters and not enough real development. So let's manufacture some tension. And yeah, I get why Sarah and Carl wouldn't probably be at each other's throats, or at least why she wouldn't want to be able to be around him. And I understand that tension, but something about it didn't feel right. Like, it should have felt organic. It should feel real. I go back to the scene in Terminator 2 when she first sees him, and that felt real. That felt, I don't know, something about it. Like, her performance was fine and his performance was fine, but I just didn't buy it. It just felt contrived, and like they were just like, it felt more like we were just moving from one action set piece to the next. And in the meantime, we'll throw in a little bit of comedy, some was hit or miss. We'll throw in a little bit of conflict, hit or miss. And then we go to the next action set piece. So I don't know. It didn't work for me.
Well, Grace reveals that Danny not only saves the world, but she also saved her as a child, becomes the leader of the resistance, almost like the architect, and changes the world. With the story, IG, being so female-centric, did you feel that the movie should have been called Terminator Her? And as a guy in these movies anymore, from the story standpoint, does it make you feel bad that we're generally portrayed as the bad guys?
No, it doesn't really make me feel bad, because that's not what I thought about with this movie. Because quite honestly, Carl, in my opinion, was probably the best part of the whole movie. I mean, while Sarah Connor's character and Gracie, they were great, and they were passable, and they did a good job on what they were doing. The movie didn't get really entertaining to me until they got to the original Terminator. And even though, like, he was older looking, and I don't know how the hell that works. Like, why would he age? But he did, and that's fine. It really kind of struck me that he was like self-aware, that he's so funny, and everything else is going. And it really started to make the movie watchable. And the problem is you had to get almost 2/3 of the way through the movie before you even saw him. And having female-led movies and female strong characters and everything, we've had some movies in the recent past that they've really started doing that more and more. Captain Marvel, the Wonder Woman movies, and we've got another one of those coming soon. And they've done very well, and they've been enjoyable to watch and everything. And what I think they were trying to do here was shoehorn in multiple women that are all going to be strong, and they missed. Because while the movie's not terrible, the female characters almost seem like they just wanted to fight with each other all the time for no reason other than to have them fight with each other. And that doesn't lead to making them strong, and it doesn't lead to making them likable.
It just makes them look atypical catty women, like, oh, estrogen express. There's a whole bunch of chicks all in one car, and they're all bitching at each other. Woo,
exactly, and that's the problem with what's going on here. Is it really took putting Arnold in the mix so that at least one of them had an outlet to point at to be pissy. And granted, like, her pissiness was well placed, and then all of a sudden she gets over it, like, for nothing, which I thought was another hilarious moment that wasn't meant to be hilarious.
No, it all has to do with the kill box. You weren't paying attention.
So I would say with I'm all for movies, and I'm glad that we're seeing more movies that feature female characters and feature minority characters as leads. And, we still have plenty that also feature white male characters too. So it's not, I think we're getting a good mix. But I think the issue has more to do with the fact that if you look at the writers on the movie, I think it was all guys. And so part of, I think, the problem now that we're seeing is, a lot of times we'll get movies that feature like strong female characters, but it's still written from the perspective of a man. So, so the females then will act in a way that, the guy thinks that the strong female character should be. And I think that when we do see things where we do get strong female characters, often they're also written by women because there's a perspective there that guys don't have, or, if it's a minority, there's a perspective that if you're not a minority, you're not going to have. So I think, this movie suffers a little bit from that, just from what I see, it's like they're kind of at each other's throats, and they're kind of superficially strong, they're physically strong, but there's not a lot of depth there. Like the main character, or the woman who the world will kind of, who has a world on her back, was barely written at all. Like, I mean, she had a little bit of a storyline in the beginning, where they kind of touched on her, her parents and and then, it's like, oh, that's it. Okay. She's just going to be.
She had one scene of character building where they built her up to be a strong person. That's where she goes into that office for her brother. That was it. That was it. There was absolutely nothing else that made you believe that Danny Ramos, Natalia, whatever, that she was going to be a strong leader of the world one day.
So that's the issue. Is I think we need to maybe have, if you're going to write about certain characters, it's great great that we have strong female leads in this, female leads in this movie, but maybe we need to get some women in the writer's room to steer this in a little bit more in the right direction and have a little bit better written characters.
Well, Ryan, with a disappointing $70 million weekend take, what do you think kept the fans away from Dark Fate? Do you think it was the stink of the previous three movies? Because there was certainly a lot of advertisement for it.
I think it was a bit of cynicism. I think it was the stink of the first three movies. I think that the reviews for this weren't great, but they weren't bad. I think for some of the reviews it was like, kind of a return to form, but, the reviews weren't spectacular, a lot of cynicism. And at the end of the day, it should have just ended with Judgment Day. You had two phenomenal movies. And why? I mean, I get, they got to make money and everything's a franchise, but just it's done. End it. We don't need anything else. And just by adding more movies to this, every subsequent movie, except for Salvation, just renders Terminator 2 as movie. And the only reason why, not that Salvation is a good movie, but at least it's focused on a different time period that doesn't affect what happens in Terminator 2, or doesn't render it ineffectual, where every other movie pretty much does. So yeah, I think that's it. I mean, you're not going to beat Terminator 2, and we've had multiple movies now that have all been mediocre to bad. So why expect this to be any better?
The finale of the movie included a brawl on a plane crash, a Humvee freefall, and then a brawl to the death inside of a steel dam. Was it worth the ride, and could they fit any more action into the last 20 minutes of the movie? Did you kind of go into overload?
Yeah, it was too much. Too many things going on, and even the movement inside of the plane as it's basically crashing to the ground, is really making me go, what the hell is going on? And I guess they're really trying to make us believe that some of this is just so easy. I mean, if you're flying a plane and you have radar and you see this thing coming at you, it's the same thing that they do in space movies where somehow they all end up on a 2D plane, and it's just hanging up, and they lost you. And instead they just kind of stay on their path. She doesn't even try and turn the plane to keep him from crashing into her, which, how is he going to know when she's going to turn? It's going to be really hard for him to catch up. So that threw me off. And then he just, again, just like with the truck, catapults himself out the front of the damn airplane. And it just all was too much. Now, when they finally got on the ground and the fight was happening down there, we finally got to a point where it's okay, this is fine. But it was just almost underwhelming because they had tried to throw so much at us before that in all the different things they were doing that it just turned into, okay, this isn't great anymore. And I'm used to just a certain style and a certain suspense going on in a Terminator movie, especially if you look at the first two, because the rest of them I'm just going to cancel out. They don't exist to me anymore. I don't watch them. They're gone. So we'll call it a trilogy and just call this the last one, and probably the one they shouldn't have done, because all they did was wipe out the first two with their story and then try and do so much action that it's almost negative action. So while it was shot well and some of the things were really cool to see, some of it was really just contrived and stupid, and I didn't enjoy it. The movie itself, I mean, there's problems, there's good parts, there's bad parts, but honestly, the action left a lot to be desired. A lot of jump cuts, a lot of fast moving things that you aren't really able to follow what's going on and everything. It could have done a lot better. That's for sure.
I think sometimes less is more, and they just did a lot. And it felt like they just pushed this to the point where we could get someplace dark and confined with whirling turbines. But the airplane crash was a little much for me. As visually cool as it was, not perfectly done, but as visually cool as it was done, I just didn't see the need for it. If they would have ended up in the same place via truck or anything else, I would have been fine with it. Kim, in the end, the Rev 9 is defeated. Danny is saved through the teamwork and sacrifice and positive attitudes. Your thoughts on the final battle and your rating?
I don't know if I even feel worthy of commenting on the final battle. There was a lot going on, but I did find myself kind of clenching up at a couple of instances, especially during the plane scene where I felt tension. There are some things about it that it just didn't make sense to me. For example, they have the EMP, backing up a few scenes. They have the EMP. They are in the warehouse. They are there. They are in position. Why didn't they just detonate it when they were in the warehouse? Why did they run away from, this new Terminator? Movie could have ended right freaking there. whole new, ending to the story. Everyone could have left happy. That just didn't make sense to me. I felt like the being there with the turbines and the water was the same thing that we saw with the original Terminator and the molten metal fire pits, whatever, the vats. It was like the exact same thing, except the opposite end of the spectrum. And I felt like that's how the entire movie was kind of played out. And it shocks me because I think James Cameron had kind of had some shit thrown at him a long time ago, a couple years ago, where he had taken a stab at the Marvel movies for being played out. We're beating a dead horse. He made this big statement and kind of took a stab at them for playing out the scenario of, a bunch of people just wrecking the city and da-da-da-da. And it's the same stuff. What he did was the exact same thing. And so it was a little shocking to me that he would come back and he would do something like this, but use the same format from old and trying to refresh it. I felt like they were trying to make too many, I don't want to say political, but he was trying to dip his toes into making it ultra relevant. We're going to talk about Mexico. We're going to have a whole bunch of, Hispanic and Latinas and da-da-da that are going to be in the movie. We're going to have a predominant female lead. Nope, let's give 2 or 3 of them. Let's talk about California. Let's bring Texas into the mix. Let's do this, this, and this. And I felt like it was way too much. I liked the individuals. I liked the way that they acted out what they were given. I liked the movie. It's not something I would probably go see again. All in all, I'd probably give it a 6. And I'm kind of sighing at that. And that's really just because I was around for the original movies. I have an affection for Arnold Schwarzenegger and that whole, original 2 movies. So that's where I'm going to leave it at.
Terminator 2 and Terminator 1, one of the greatest sci-fi movies and the greatest pair of sci-fi movies of all time. Pretty confident that we all cried at Terminator 2. And it was one of the most powerful movies, especially for me growing up as a kid. And just, it holds up. The effects hold up. It's iconic. It's got everything you want in a movie. And so while the other movies were not very good and did very little, to help the legacy of the movie, I think this just took a shit all over it with the opening scene by killing John Connor and, effectively saying, well, yeah, none of that mattered. That movie didn't matter. And so when that happened, I immediately said, fuck this movie. If I would give it credit, if it found a way to justify that, if it found a way to make me say, okay, that sucked, but I understand why they did it. It made sense. And this is going to lead to something, better. And it in no way, shape or form did that. Nothing about this movie. It effectively was like the Force Awakens of Terminator movies in that, it tried to bring back some stuff you liked, a little more girl power, but, bring back old characters, but revisit the plot, revisit almost every plot point. But none of it was done better. None of it was original, unlike the Force Awakens, which really did kind of tap into the nostalgia and really did, even though it was a rehash of A New Hope, it felt fresh and I enjoyed it. This one, it was a slog. And on top of me just hating the opening scene, it was just not a good movie. Sure, there were a couple of interesting moments. I kind of like the idea of what they do with Carl and kind of how he has this existential crisis after, completing his task. And he was kind of funny. And the performances are fine. I think Mackenzie Davis is imposing, or she's not imposing, but shows great physicality. And Gabriel Luna was fine as the villain. And it's always great to see Linda Hamilton and Schwarzenegger. So performances were fine with what they were given, but I just think the writing was bad to terrible. That first scene was unforgivable, especially since they couldn't find a way to justify it. So I was going to give it a 0, but I can't, because there's at least some redeeming qualities. So I'm going to give it a 2. Solid 2.
Further proof that Ryan is a jerk. To give it a 2, they almost would have had to serve him feces on a platter in the movie theater, but I digress. This is not a great movie. it's just not. There's too many problems, too many plot holes, too many things going on that they just dug themselves a hole that they couldn't get out of. For me, the only redeeming thing in this movie is Schwarzenegger and Linda Hamilton together again. And especially Schwarzenegger, like having learned to kind of be human, and the whole time when he's explaining how he was raised and Sarah Connor, she didn't notice that you're 400 pounds and made out of metal and everything. And it was hilarious and great all at the same time. Like, that stuff made this possibly rewatchable for me. Now, maybe I'll just fast forward until he answers the door and just watch from then on. And this will be a Terminator short story, kind of like a TV episode. It'll be like 40 minutes. Life will be good. And then we'll move on. And I can live with that. And that being said, that's where my rating is going to come from, because, the rest of it was almost filler, and it was bad filler at that. So I enjoyed the last third of the movie quite a bit. I think the plane was a bit much, but everything else, I'm there for it. It worked for me. The first 2/3 of the movie, it just, again, like we said earlier, it seemed like, let's put all three of these women together and let them bitch at each other for no reason other than that's what women are supposed to do, quote unquote. And that's not women in my experience all the time. I mean, I've seen it, but that's not all women are. So I'm going to rate just on the back third, and I'll give it a 6 for the back third. Not great, but fun to watch. I'll watch the back third of it again. I'll probably watch the whole thing again, but I'm not going to go to a theater and see it again. So yeah, I'll give it a 6.
This was definitely more of a summer popcorn movie. It was mindless. There was some fun, and the end sequence was just insane and violent and all over the place. It felt like that little dude in a really big truck to me. And you know what he's compensating for. And that's what it felt like with this movie. Like, they threw so much action into it because there was very little script. So we'll just overload it with big explosions and sequences, and maybe the people won't realize that there's just too many people in this car. There's not enough time to develop characters because we have 4 people when we should probably have 2. And what kills me about James Cameron is that Terminator 2 was interesting and cool and innovative and broke molds, and that was 1991. And we fast forward, and the action sequences are much better, but at the same time, we're still doing the same thing with the Terminators. They're still made of liquid metal. There's a exoskeleton inside of it. Hats off to Gabriel Luna. I mean, he did his best Robert Patrick. I thought he was scary, terrifying. Tim Miller's influence was definitely seen throughout the movie as the movie kind of had a sense of itself, and a little bit like Deadpool had a sense of humor. Like, it mocked itself at places. I enjoyed the original cast immensely, even if they are significantly older and a lot more grumpy. Carl was great. I thought Mackenzie Davis being part of it was awesome, and her and Linda Hamilton, even though it became a little much, they did play off each other and balance each other out pretty well. It was great to see all of them again, even though all logic was thrown out the window. Reality needs to be set aside when you sit down to watch something like that and just left at the door. I enjoyed the ride overall. I mean, I'll give it a 6.5. I kind of hope that the franchise stays the course if they're going to do any more movies, but I also at the same time think it's time to let it go and leave it alone, and we'll just put our flag in the first 2 movies and call it good.
And that's it. You made it to the end of another episode of the Cinik Radio podcast. I'm Igrihe, here with Cinik, who you can find at CINIKRADIO.com. Also, we had Ryan, who you can find at thejimwits.com, and Kim, who you can find at kmcartworks.com. Great artists. Go check out some really cool stuff. We'll be back next week with some new stuff for you, probably some news as well. Send your crazy news stories, any comments, questions, and concerns to us at CINIKRadio@gmail.com. Find us on the internet at CINIKRadio.com. Look for us on Facebook at Facebook.com/CINIKRadio. Find us on Twitter at CINIKRadio. And find us on Instagram at Cinik Radio. You can also head over to tpublic.com, search for Cinik, CINIK, and get your own Cinik Radio podcast gear. T-shirts, mugs, cups, stickers, all the cool Cinik Radio podcast stuff you could possibly want. It'd help the show, and we would greatly appreciate it. Thanks again for all the love and support. Keep listening, sharing it with your friends, like, listen, and subscribe. And until next time, don't get captured.
Follow the podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and at CINIKRADIO.com. Available for download on iTunes.